Hello everybody, welcome to our ongoing discussion on short fiction. If we can quickly recall what we did in the last class, we discussed various elements of short fiction, and before that we understood what short fiction meant, different types of short fiction, and of course if you want to be a short story writer or if you ever try writing a short story, what kind of recipe you require. So we gave you some kind of broad tips as how to compose your first ever beautiful short story. Well, now is the time for us to get to know short story in detail. So what I am going to propose today is a remarkable short story, and the writer who has written it is one of the exemplary short story writers who ever existed on this planet. Okay, well, of course you already have seen the title. The writer we are discussing today is Borges, an extraordinary Argentine writer, and the short story is taken from his collection of short stories called The Book of Sand, and this particular story is The Book of Sand itself. Why do I call this an extraordinary short story? I am sure when you read the short story you will definitely agree with me that this is one of the brilliant short stories you would have ever read. Before we discuss the short story and of course get to know the writer in a little more detailed manner, I have a very interesting excerpt from a beautiful poem by William Blake. We have discussed William Blake. You are not new to William Blake. So this is an excerpt from William Blake's poem. How is that poem related to the short story we are reading? Well, just watch this. Well, watch these lines and reflect on what they have got to say, and let's see later, after having read the story, if you can connect the dots and see how they are linked. Okay, here goes the beautiful excerpt from William Blake, and the poem is called Auguries of Innocence. Auguries of Innocence. Of course, you already know that Blake is a visionary poet, a precursor to romantic poetry, and you also know that he believed that his poems were dictated to him in his dreams by beings above, and in the morning he just had to copy them down, something like that. So probably this poem too is no exception to that statement, Auguries of Innocence. To see a world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wild flower, hold infinity at the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. Well, not a poem that can give itself in so easily to you, right, in the very first reading. So you might have to go again, read it again. The poem is propelled by a paradox, right? You are already familiar with the literary device paradox. So there is a kind of a contradictory statement or a series of contradictions that propel this entire verbal picture. See what is happening in this. Read it again, please. To see a world in a grain of sand. Look at the use of binaries. In a single quatrain, the poem makes use of a number of binaries in order to construct its paradoxical meaning. Right in the very first line, you have world, it's a kind of a macrocosmos, and you have a grain of sand. How is a grain of sand linked to the world? If world is a macrocosmos, grain of sand is a microcosmos. So something which is the smallest and the biggest. Look how they are sewn together. And you have heaven and wildflower similarly bound. You have in the next line infinity and the palm of your hand, eternity and an hour. So it presents some kind of a verbal problem. You are used to mathematical problems, right? Now look what is happening here. In order for you to solve the first two lines, you need to make, or you need to understand, or you need to make it possible the next two lines in this quatrain. To see the world in a grain of sand, you need to hold infinity in the palm of your hand, and heaven in a wildflower. If you want to do that, you have to hold eternity in an hour. How is it possible? What is the poet trying to say? Of course, for want of time, I would have generally asked you to comment in detail, and maybe in the next class we could have taken it up for a detailed discussion, but for want of time, let us go ahead and see what the poem is trying to say, right. So, probably, because always remember, we have said it, that a poem makes sense through the shades of ambiguities it hides within its penumbral spaces, right. A poem makes sense through the shades of meanings, not the concrete meanings, but through ambiguities, through uncertainties. So, probably the governing principle or the operative principle that you find in a world, you do not need to go to that extent. Even if you come to know a grain of sand, probably you will be able to understand the entire world. And similarly, if you want to know what heaven is, all that you have to do is to understand a wildflower, which can contain the whole principle of heaven in it, right. Similarly is infinite, because when you talk of grasping infinite or something which is infinite, it is something that baffles human mind. Whereas, when you say it is the palm of your hand, it is something that you and I see every day, right. So, even if we come to know what is there in our palm of hand, we would be able to understand the concept of infinity. Therefore, understanding, in order for us to understand, we need to understand the essence of it, and then probably the entire universe opens up its secrets for us, something like this. Now, keep this poem aside, for time being, and now let us come to discuss the short story, and later, of course, you yourself on your own can connect the dots. Okay. Well, we have already identified the writer as an extraordinary writer. In fact, he is one of those writers who did not get the Nobel, and the loss is not to the writer, but to the Nobel Prize itself. He is a remarkable writer to that extent. He is a major modern writer, but it is said that his writings inaugurate the postmodern strand in literature. That's that credit goes to him, major Argentine writer. And of course, in the picture that you see, you may be right if you have guessed that it seems he has lost his sight. It is true. Right at an early age, when he was hardly 40-45 years old, he lost his eyesight, and strangely enough, during that time he was made the director of the Argentine National Library. So, you can see the irony, and of course, Borges did not miss the irony, and that is when he seemed to have remarked, no one should read self-pity or reproach into the statement of majesty of the God, who with such splendid glory, who with such splendid irony granted me books and night at one touch. Granted me books, because he is now the director of the entire Argentine National Library, and unfortunately he can't read it. Nevertheless, he continued reading. He did not, the loss of sight did not stop this writer either from reading books or from writing whatever he wrote. In fact, he wrote many of his works after having lost sight of, after having lost sight of his eyes. So it's a remarkable writer. So these are some well-known, remarks attributed to Borges, especially the one here. You have wakened not out of sleep, especially the writer is known for blurring the boundaries between the wakeful state and the sleepful state, reality and fantasy, fact and fiction. His in poems after poems, essays after essays, and in his short stories after short stories, you find the boundaries getting blurred between these binaries. So, when you wake up, you think you have woken up into reality, but who knows, reminding us of the 3rd or 4th century Chinese philosopher Chuangzi, who said in his remarkable poem The Butterfly, he says when you wake up, you think that you have woken up into reality, but who knows, you might have as well slipped into another state of dream, something like this. So, these are some influences, you can as well say influences. Jorge Luis Borges, is a major short story writer, more than that, poet, essayist, and a translator. Of course, he was a polymath, an extraordinary scholar, who must have poured the entire world literature. That's the reason why in his writings you find traces of Latin literature, traces of Greek literature, French literature, more than anything else, Indian literature, Chinese literatures. You can find influences of all of them. Even in the short story we read, it's linked to India in an extraordinary way. Of course, we discuss more of that in the subsequent slides. All right. And in fact, considering his contribution, another fellow Nobel laureate and Octavia Paz, he says that Borges wrote in he says that Borges cultivated three genres: the essay, the poem, and the short story, right? Unfortunately or fortunately, the division is absolutely arbitrary, because his essays, if you read them, they read like stories, and if you pick up his stories, they exhibit his extraordinary poetic capabilities, and when you read his poems, they make you think as though they are extraordinary philosophical pieces, critical pieces for extraordinary thinking, something like this. And another fellow critic, he says that Borges' grasp of world literature is one of the defining features of his art. That's why I said he was a polymath, right? Having been influenced by the entire world literature, his stories, in fact, if you want to get a flavor of world literature, just read his short stories. If you ask me personally, I have two favorite writers when it comes to short stories. One is Borges, the other is Jewish American writer Isaac Bashevis Singer, and they represent two extraordinary features. In fact, if you look at Singer, he focuses on human being, just human being, whereas if you look at Borges, it's more than human beings. In fact, the manifestation of the universe and the correlations between the universal principles and how a human being tries to define his identity, seek his identity vis-a-vis that universal features, this is something that we find in Borges. Therefore, you can call them, in terms of their treatment of the subjects, they are almost poles apart, but they are exemplary writers. Okay, so if there are 3 to 4 words, of course it's reductivistic, we can't reduce a writer to 4 words, but if there are 4 keywords that can define Borges' oeuvre of writing, one is time. He was obsessed with time, especially the concept of infinity, eternity, and all that. Then mirrors, books, and labyrinths. So if there is any writer, in fact, give these 4 keywords to any perceptive student of literature, that student would invariably tell you, well, they belong to Borges, something like that, right? So now let's go ahead and take a look at the short story. Before that, of course, very interesting thing. In fact, when somebody asks him, what is Borges' idea of paradise, he seemed to have said that I have always imagined paradise to be something like a kind of library. He himself was the director of one of the biggest libraries in the world, and in fact, he was continuously obsessed with books and libraries. Despite the misfortune in his life, books played a major role. And when somebody asked him if he believed in reincarnation, he seemed to have said, well, not so much in the traditional sense of the term, but if writers die, I believe they would be born as books. Of course, it's not a bad imagination for writers to have, right? Well, we have popular notions where if you die, you're born into a star, and the Native Americans think you are born into a plant or something like that. And here is a writer making the remark that you would be turned into a book, something like this. So here is the short story. Let's not waste time. Let's get into this. It begins in a very enigmatic way. The short story begins rather enigmatically. In fact, you might as well be under the impression that it's something like geometry. He says lines consist of an infinite number of points, planes an infinite number of lines, volumes an infinite number of planes, and hypervolumes an infinite number of volumes. You may be under the impression we are discussing geometry. Absolutely no, we are definitely discussing fiction. And he says these days everybody thinks whatever they say it's a true story, however his story is true, something like that. Okay. And now the story begins. It so happens that the narrator or the protagonist in the story is a retired guy. So he is relaxing, and all of a sudden one afternoon maybe he hears a knock on the door, and when he opens it, to his surprise he finds a stranger, a tall man of indistinct features. So obviously this guy looks like a foreigner. However, the moment he enters, the stranger, when the narrator welcomes in, he realizes that the stranger exudes a strange melancholic air, which as I do now, he says. So the entire story is narrated from a flashback point of view. We have discussed flashback technique. You can quickly recall that. So it's a recollection of what happened. Now, when he welcomes the stranger in, he realizes that the stranger is actually a Bible seller, but not any kind of Bibles, and this guy himself is bibliophile. You know the meaning of bibliophile, a lover of books. He says, I don't think there is any dearth of Bibles in this house, and he goes on to even illustrate the rarest of the rare Bibles that he has, and things like that. And all of a sudden the stranger says he doesn't merely sell Bibles, he has in his possession a rare book, probably a magical kind of a book, and he goes on to show this book to him. In fact, the protagonist shows a lot of interest because he says it's a book that you wouldn't have seen anything like that. And imagine it's not an ordinary statement because he is the director of a national library. He would have seen all kinds of books, and when the stranger says it's one of the rarest books and he shows interest, and the stranger opens his book and spreads a cloth bound octavo volume, which of course gives the impression that it must have been passed on. Several hands must have involved in that book. So when he examines it, he experiences an unexpected weight there. When he holds the book, the volume of the book doesn't, it's not proportionate to the weight that he anticipates, something like that. And on the spine he says Holy Writ, it's printed Holy Writ, and below that Bombay, giving an impression. Of course, not just here, you find India connections to the story in more remarkable ways than just this. So then the stranger goes on to narrate how he acquired this book. He said that while he was traveling in India, somewhere on the outskirts of Bikaner, he comes across this story, this book, and the owner who had this book was somebody who didn't know how to read it. Therefore he gave him some money and also Bible, and picked this book in return. Now he has come to sell it. Now he realizes that the text was cramped and arranged in versicles. When the protagonist opens it, he sees it's arranged in versicles as if in multiple columns it's arranged. And the moment he opens it, he notices something strange here. What is it? Let's say, for instance, on the left hand side, if there is a page number 40,514, on the right hand side he notices the page number, let's say for instance 999. Well, this is something strange, right? Of course, he doesn't make out in which language it is written. Probably they think it must be written in Sanskrit, but the stranger says no. In fact, nobody knew how to read it. Therefore, probably it's written in one of the dialects, and anyhow, nobody knows how to read it. That's the state. Now, all that they can identify is the page number, which is Arabic numerals. So, generally the right hand side should have one page number more than the left hand side, right. If you have noticed, if the left hand side is 93, 94, 110, 111, something like this. So, here strangely it has some kind of a curious, it looks like a mismatch, and this guy thinks that it must be some kind of a printing mistake or something like that. And when he is turning through the pages, in one of the pages he comes across a small illustration, something like an anchor, something like an anchor that you can find in dictionaries, and it looks as if it's been drawn by a child, an unskilled hand at writing, something like that. This is when the mystery intensifies, and the stranger says, pause here for a while, study this page, because once you flip through the page, you will never be able to see this page again. Now, this must pique your curiosity as well, right? How is it? Because now they have identified the page number. So, if you want to come back here, it should be easy for you to come back, right? But the stranger says, no, you will never be able to come back. And as if in a very menacing way, he says, now close your book and open it again. And immediately the protagonist closes the book, and when he opens it and frantically searches for quite some time, and to his dismay, he does not find the page number, and he tries to search for the anchor. He is unable to locate the anchor. Now, this looks a bit menacing, because I don't think there is anything like that. Then now continuing his strange speaking, the stranger says, now try to open the first page. Now, this should sound easy for all of us, right? Because opening the first page, what is so challenging here? You just have to open, and what you get is the first page. Now, look at it. When the protagonist tries getting the first page, what does he get? I placed my left hand on the cover and opened the book with my thumb and forefinger almost touching. All my efforts were useless, because as if all of a sudden several pages always seem to come in between the cover and my hand. Every time you open it, it seems some random pages are coming. Random pages, it's not the 20 page, sometimes if it's 20 pages, sometimes it's the page number illustrate. All that they can understand is page number turned to the power of 5, power of 9, something like that. Now, when he is still reeling under the shock, the stranger says, now open the last page. Again, the protagonist fails. I only manage to stammer in a voice not my own, this cannot be. You neither can open the first page nor the last page. You are unable to even find the page that you once opened, and these page numbers are mentioned in any random way. There seems to be no order here, because generally, as I said, if the left hand side page has 103, the right hand should have 104, and here if the left hand side has a page number of, let's say, 33,48,501, the left hand side has a page number of 99, and this kind of randomness continues. And in a highly incredulous voice, he says, it cannot be. And the visitor continues, the stranger continues, it cannot be, right, still it is. The number of pages in this book is exactly infinite. No page is the first, none is the last. I don't know why they are numbered in this arbitrary way. Perhaps it's to indicate that an infinite series includes any number after any order. And then continues his philosophical discussion. If space is infinite, we are in no particular point in space. If time is infinite, we are in no particular point in time, right? Now imagine a circle, mathematically speaking. We say in a circle, no point is the beginning, no point is an ending. Now imagine a huge circle, and there you don't know when you know the point you stand, is it that of a beginning, is it that of an ending, whether you need to turn left and go, whether you need to turn right and go, you don't even know what is happening here. Here is something that the narrator is holding in his hand that defies his entire sense of coherence, his entire sense of logic. In fact, he comes to perceive it as a monstrous being. Of course, he realizes that a little later, but definitely he knows that he holds in his hand a kind of book of books. And metaphorically, in fact, as I said, he has another short story called The Library of Babel, where he imagines the entire universe to be one huge library made of hexagonal rooms, and where every book that was written, that is written, and that will be written is already stored in that kind of a book. It's a metaphor, it's a Borgesian metaphor for universe. Well, if you can further condense that metaphor, because metaphor itself is a condensed verbal picture, if you can further condense it, well, then you come at this book called the Book of Sand. Now he says, why is this called a book of sand? He says, like sand has neither beginning nor end, this book too has no beginning nor an ending. That's why probably it's called the Book of Sand. We don't know, right? So this is the book. Now he asks out of curiosity the protagonist, what do you intend to do with it? Do you want to sell it to British Museum? He says, no, I have no intention of selling, I can sell it to you. Well, then of course, this guy, they settle down on a price. This guy says he has just retired and he has some corpus of money, huge money, and he is willing to sell, buy it using that money. And reluctantly, of course, the stranger agrees and hands over the book and leaves. That's it. That's it. Now, what has happened? Against the joy of possessing the book grew the fear that it would be stolen. Obviously, when you have something rare in your hand, something that that's unique in the entire world, more than the happiness, you are plagued by the fear that you may lose it. This fear of loss, the fear of loss is it's something that we are, we are in the grips, we are constantly in the grips of the fear of loss, especially when we have something very valuable. So this happens. So in order to unravel the mystery of the book, our narrator night after night sits and tries to see what is there in the book. Unfortunately, they can't read it. Remember, it's written in a language, it's written in a dialect that they can't read or decipher. All that they can decipher when they open the page is the page number and some small illustrations here and there. So months roll by, seasons roll by, something like this, and this guy now almost on the verge of he's on the edge of sanity and insanity. That's when he realizes that the book that he holds in his hand is a monstrous piece, right? So now he doesn't know what to do with it, because this is a tantalizing book. Now look at this. Tantalizing is a beautiful metaphor, based on the Greek mythology. Tantalizing is also a very beautiful word. Tantalizing is something is within your reach, and when you're about to touch that, it slightly goes away. Just always, let's say, a foot away from your reach. So if you reach there, it goes a little further. If you reach there, just a little further, all the while giving you the impression that you might, if you stretch yourself, you might get it. So the book it tantalizes because the narrator is under the impression that here is a key to unlocking the mysteries of the universe, because it's a book of the books. But unfortunately, he can't read it, and he also doesn't want to lose it. So that's why he says he grows misanthrope and he's on the edge of sanity. Now, unable to withstand this continuous onslaught on his rationality, our guy thinks of burning it. Now he thinks of burning it, because what do you do with this book? What do you do with this book? He only grew mad, right? So he thinks of burning it initially, but realizes if you burn this book of the books, the entire planet may choke in the smoke raised, right? You don't know. Therefore, he remembers a proverb: the best way to lose a leaf is in the forest, in the plain sight. So he decides to lose this book in the Argentine National Library. So when the librarian is not sitting there, or when his attention is elsewhere, he goes there, and somewhere, even without actually consciously identifying where he is keeping the book, he slips the book and comes away. This is the story for us. This is in a nutshell the story. And he says he almost avoids even going through that street now. Now that we know the story, now come to think of it, what is the story trying to say? Of course, like all stories, as I have already stated, they offer they offer a reconceptualization, because the very purpose of literature is to make us look at things from a fresh perspective. Now, you and I are familiar with the concept of the infinite, So when we say something to raise to the power of n, 10 to the power of n is infinite. So we are almost accustomed to the very concept of infinity now. So in order for us to understand the concept of infinity, it's not that mathematicians have exhausted the notion of infinity. Well, here is a different imagination to understanding one of the most mind-boggling and perplexing concept that has ever haunted humanity, infinite. So could this be also a way to understand the concept of infinite? We don't know, because we don't know. As I said, nobody can exhaust it. And as I said, there are some very interesting things that you need to know about this particular book. I said it has an India connection. This is the India connection. In fact, even in the Indian tradition, it is said that there is a reference to the work called Bruhat Katha. In fact, Katha Saritsagara, we have identified a series of stories, Katha Saritsagara, written by Somadeva and something about 11th century. Even before that, there are a lot of ancient Indian works that allude to a book called Bruhat Katha, and the author of this particular Bruhat Katha is identified as Gunadhya. And it is also said that nobody could read it because it's written in a dialect called Paishachi. It's written in Paishachi Bhasha, and unfortunately, this dialect is not spoken by anybody in India. So therefore, you have strangely many writers referring to this book. In fact, Katha Saritsagara itself, the writer says, is based on Gunadhya's Bruhat Katha, but nobody seemed to have seen this copy, Bruhat Katha. So it's still an eternal mystery, Paishachi dialect, Bruhat Katha. And of course, Katha Saritsagara we have identified, and you also can find traces of Arabian Nights, and especially Don Quixote, Cervantes' Don Quixote and Shakespeare. These are some remarkable influences on this particular short story. And based on Borges' concept of infinity, a professor of mathematics at Wheaton College called William Goldbloom Block, he has written a book called The Unimaginable Mathematics of Borges' Library of Babel in 2008. Well, if mathematics is what interests you, you can as well look at it. In fact, there's an entire department of mathematics that's devoted to understanding the mathematical concepts that Borges unveils in his short stories, and this particular book is a significant effort in understanding Borgesian mathematics, right? So well, I hope you enjoyed this short story. Please read it. In fact, no amount of summing up can do justice to the beauty that the original short story contains. Please read the short story, and in case you have anything interesting to say, you can use our official forum, even the Facebook forum, and you can please feel free to comment. Okay. Yeah, in the next class we come up with something more interesting, some other stories that can hook you up, and that can that have the ability to captivate your attention something like this. Until then, take care. Bye bye.